Welcome to the Military Justice Today podcast with your host, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams, covering the full range of military law topics from all branches of the armed forces. Today's episode is made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. And now, let's welcome the hosts of the show, Rob and Mickey.
All right, everybody, here we go. Another episode of Military Justice Today. I'm Matt Starosiak. With me in the studio are military attorneys and veterans, Robert Capovilla and Daniel Higgins. Greetings, gentlemen.
Hello, Matthew.
How you guys doing today?
Happy to be back.
Nice to see you both. We're going to skip the usual small talk today as we've got the most serious of issues to cover, and that's the assassination attempt of President Trump. We're fortunate enough to have Dan in the studio with us, who was an Army Ranger and sniper during the time he spent in service to our nation. So we're super excited to get his thoughts and comments on what transpired this weekend. But before we do that, we think it's very important to recognize that while President Trump survived the attempt on his life, another American did not, and others were seriously injured. So our thoughts and prayers go out to the family and friends of Corey Comparator. Please know that you are not forgotten, and America stands with you as you grieve this incredible loss. All right, two disclaimers. First, everything we discuss on today's show and every episode of Military Justice, for that matter, is opinion. Of course, we do everything in our power to be 100% accurate, the things we say and do, but nevertheless, this is an opinion show, Robert.
I agree. You are right about that. Although I think some of the things I talk about, in particular when it comes to things like Urban Meyer, Ohio State football, I think those are primarily facts.
You think those qualify?
But most everything else are opinions, I would agree.
I'm sure everybody, all of our listeners agree with that as well. And second, we won't be getting into the politics of the day, other than maybe to make some predictions at the end of the show about where this presidential race might go. But with that, let's get started. So I'd like to try to cover this in chronological order, at least if we can, starting with the pre-planning for an event such as the rally in Pennsylvania this weekend. But before we do that, let's talk about your background, Dan. How long did you serve in the Army? And tell us a little bit about what you did in your time in the armed forces.
Yeah, so I served a little over 10 years in the Army, both as an NCO and an officer, and I spent my entire career in the infantry and special operations. My first 3.5 years or so were spent as a sniper and sniper team leader. And then the rest of my career was spent as an officer and a platoon leader in the infantry and special operations in the 75th Ranger Regiment. So the first, 3.5 years or so, I spent as a sniper team leader, deployed to Baghdad as a sniper team leader. And, we could talk more about that, but that's kind of the basis of my background.
What kind of training goes into being a sniper? I mean, I would assume everybody gets firearms training to a certain extent that joins the service, but there's got to be a lot of training that comes in addition to that to earn that title of sniper and to take on those responsibilities. Yeah,
what's funny is that I didn't get into the sniper section because I was a good shooter. Basically, a first sergeant came around the companies and just told the platoon sergeants, hey, give me your two best guys. And the platoon sergeants picked out two guys from the formation. And luckily, my platoon sergeant, liked me, or he thought highly of me and said, hey, Baselli, Higgins, let's go. And so I fell out of this formation over into another formation, and I had no idea what it was. There's probably 60 guys in this formation at the end of the day. And we began a very grueling selection process, right? And we were just told that it was going to be the best outfit in the battalion. So naturally, being competitive, I was like, okay, well, whatever this is, I want to be a part of it, right? And so after, 2 weeks go by of, long 10, 12-mile runs, 12-mile rucks, just getting smoked and destroyed every day, boards with the first sergeant, sergeant major and everything, then we find out, hey, you're trying out for the sniper section.
Wow.
And after a couple weeks, we dwindled it down from 50 to 60 guys down to 7. And so I ended up being part of the sniper section. So to answer your question, we did a train up. Basically, we did, informal train ups, getting ready for sniper school. Then we did a pre-sniper course, which was a pretty formal pre-sniper course to where you did marksmanship, stalking, target detection, range estimation. We can get into all that. And then off to sniper school. And there's 2 sniper schools for the Army. Well, there's actually more now. But back then, it was you had the sniper school down at Fort Moore, which was formerly Fort Benning. And then you had the National Guard Sniper School up at Camp Robinson, Arkansas. And so those were the 2 schools. I went to the one at Camp Robinson, Arkansas. Really great school, very professionally run. Went through the course, got my additional skill identifier Bravo 4. And what was really interesting about going through at that time is this is August of 2005. So we're obviously, in the middle of 2 wars. And half the class was 4th Infantry Division, which is the unit I was in at the time. The other half of the class was the 101st Airborne. And we were both deploying to Iraq. So in sniper school, they actually catered the course a little bit, or tailored the course to get us ready to deploy. What are we seeing in Baghdad right now? Right. So it was really great course. And then we ended up deploying a couple months later. But that was kind of my training curriculum, getting ready, both informal and then formal schooling.
A lot of our listeners will know what you mean when you say sniper school, but in terms of duration, what are we talking? Are we talking about days, weeks, months?
Yeah, I think
when you're doing this kind of training? It's
5 to 7 weeks. I think that I went through, my course was 5.5 weeks or something like that. It was a little bit shorter because we were getting ready to deploy. But generally, yeah, I think the course now is 6 or 7 weeks.
And how much are you shooting at that point? You talked to, doing stalking and different things like that, but how much are you actually shooting?
A lot. Yeah, you're going to do a lot of record fires. You're going to do known distance, unknown distance. Basically, your known distance is, I know how far I'm shooting out right now, and I just need to get it in, a certain area, right? I need to get it center mass on the target. Then you go to your unknown distance ranges where you're having to use range estimation to basically do the formulas. And, I'm kind of out of date because this is August 2005. Now they have all sorts of advanced technology with ballistics and calculators and, everything built into your scope. Back when I did it, you actually had to do a mathematical formula right there on your notepad based on, when you look through the scope, there's going to be mil dots on your reticle. And basically, you look at a target and you can judge the size. I know that target is generally, say 60 inches, right? So then I know if it takes up this amount of mil dots, I know that it's going to, I'm going to do the formula. And then it's like, okay, that's 640 meters away, right? And fire. So you're going to go through a lot of marksmanship. It's going to teach you all that. But you're also going to do stalking, which is, when you're in a ghillie suit and you're moving from, your start point to your final firing line to where you are trying to, move undetected, fire your blanks towards the instructors, and then they're going to use another instructor to try and, walk on you. Basically, they're going to tell you, hey, 3 steps to the left, 1 step forward, sniper at your feet, try and detect you, right? You're going to do other things like range estimation, which I just talked about. And then you're going to do something which is important for our discussion today, which is target detection, right? Because target detection is, we're all on line right here, right? And we have, maybe 50 meters out in front of us, 25 to 50 meters. And there's going to be 10 or 15 military items out there, binoculars, a compass, a pencil, a protractor, a hand grenade, right? And you have to sit down on this line and use your binoculars or your spotting scope to identify all of the items, right? And it's really difficult, actually. And it'll be interesting because sometimes it'll be interesting for our discussion today because sometimes they'll put, say like a compass or something right here on the firing line. Right next to you. And you don't see it. Right? Because you're looking out there, you're looking out 25, 30 meters out, trying, next to all these trees or cars or whatever, you're looking at, and you don't see this thing that's right in front of you.
Yeah. One more question on the training, and then we'll move forward. But at the time you were going through it, did you love it? Was it a grind? Were you like, this is what I was meant to do? What was kind of your psyche at the time when you were going through all this?
Oh, it was drinking from, a water hose. Because I was a young PFC at the time. I think I was one of the youngest to graduate back then. I think I was 19, 20 years old. And so I was very young to go through the course. So I was learning a lot every single day.
Yeah.
And it's August in Arkansas. So we're out there in ghillie suit with a drag bag, moving through these woods, snakes, spiders, bees. I mean, everything you could imagine is out there. And you are just losing so much weight because of how hot it is. It was grueling. And then you're out there on an exposed range, firing all day. And you're just
That's
cooking.
Exhausting.
You're cooking.
Is exhausting.
Yeah, no, it was it was physically challenging in a different way because it's not like Ranger School or Special Forces Selection or something like that to where it's just physically grueling. it was a different type of challenge.
How would you compare that to being in the office at Capoville and Williams when Rob has the thermostat turned down to 60 degrees in the summer and you're shivering? Is it kind of the same
equally challenging?
feeling?
Yeah, no, I think they go hand in hand. Yeah, equally challenging.
All right. Can we talk about your most famous kind of mission or assignment that you had, or is that off limits? Can we talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, we can talk generally about it. Yeah. So right after I went to sniper school, a couple months later, I deployed to Baghdad. And, we were doing offensive operations against Al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Mahdi militia and, different militant groups in our AO. But one of the other missions that we had was kind of a special operation to where we were working with the U.S. Marshals Special Operations Group to protect Saddam Hussein during his trial. Obviously, you remember he was put on trial for war crimes. And so we transitioned from an offensive sniper role to a defensive counter sniper role. And our job was to protect him during his transport. Basically, he lived at Baghdad International Airport under guard there at a confinement facility. Then the U.S. Marshals Special Operations Group would put him in helicopters and others, Chemical Ali and the rest of the senior folks, and they would move them from Baghdad International Airport into the green zone where the courthouse was. So basically our teams, what we would do is we would go in and get set up a couple hours prior to them coming in, and we would begin to scan our sectors, right, and ensure that it was safe for him to come in and land. And then once he came in and land, they would move him from the helicopter to this large up-armored bus, which was called a Rhino. And then they move him from the bus, and the MPs would be in charge of that, and then they'd move him over to the courthouse about a quarter mile away, and then get him down into his cell so he could await trial.
And so you're responsible for keeping him safe throughout that transport process.
That's right. Yeah, because if some vigilante was to shoot him and kill him, it would undermine the Iraqi judicial system, right?
Sure.
And that's what we were trying to build up at the time. And so, yeah, it was an important operation.
But then you're protecting an individual person at that point, which obviously has some similarities to what we're going to talk about today.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
That's a very cool story. I did not know about just getting pulled out of your company and basically being like, hey, you're going to sniper school. I guess that's the way it worked back then.
Yeah, no, it was a very informal process. It was very ad hoc, but I wouldn't change a thing. I loved it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's transition a little bit into the circumstances surrounding.
Hold on, Matt. Before we go on to anything more important, I have a serious question to ask Daniel here. Dan, what was harder, hiking with me through the Chattahoochee River Park on Saturday morning, or sniper school?
They're both equally challenging, but
I'm sure Rob's pace through the park was incredible.
Yeah.
We did identify some remnants of an old house that is not on the historical record there, so that was kind of cool.
No, Rob's a huge history buff, so it was a hike and a history lesson at the same time. It was actually pretty interesting.
You are welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's talk a little, and we should say that obviously you weren't involved you've never been involved with the Secret Service. You obviously don't have any connection to what happened this weekend. We're just going to kind of give your thoughts on how things are typically done and dissect it a little bit. But I'd like to start with maybe the pre-planning on an event like the one this weekend, or where you're protecting an asset or protecting somebody. There's obviously pre-planning that goes into it. I know with the Secret Service, it's no secret that they send out kind of a pre-team. I think there's a specialized name for them. They go out and they surveil and identify potential areas that could be of concern. But I'm assuming that that's very normal activities. You go out and somebody goes out a team and they start identifying where people are going to be and where they should be looking and that kind of stuff. Is that the way it works generally?
Yeah. So it's called a site survey. And, typically these things will be done weeks in advance, right? Maybe even months, depending on the scale of the event. If it's a large event, probably months out of planning. A smaller event like this, to where it looks like it was a little bit more informal and haphazard, it was a smaller area, probably a couple weeks out. You send out your initial team to do a site survey.
Yeah, I think they said 10 days was the notification that people had about the event. Now, his team may have known about it, obviously, in advance of that, but not a huge... You're
going to have a couple different waves, most likely, too, right? You're going to have an initial site survey. They're going to get back to the planners, and then they're going to go out again prior to him coming out, to verify, all right, hey, this is where we want our positions. This is, our sectors that you're going to have... the macro level to where, your planners are telling you what you want to do down to, your snipers are then going to go in and determine, okay, hey, maybe day of, right? Maybe a couple days prior they learn, all right, hey, this is where we want you set up, right? Then you're going to go in and, set all your sectors of fire. You're going to have, several bubbles, right, around the president. You're going to have that initial bubble is going to be his detail, right, which is, probably 10 to 12, maybe 15 of like that primary team, right, that you saw that all huddled on him, right? You're going to have those folks on that inner bubble. Then that next bubble out, you're going to have some more Secret Service agents. You're going to have members of the counter assault team, the CAT team. That's basically like the Secret Service's SWAT team that are going to be there. Then you go out to another bubble and you're going to have more Secret Service agents and interspersed with local and state law enforcement, right? That have both static positions where they're scanning and mobile positions to where they're patrolling, right? And kind of, looking for any threats. And then you're going to have probably an outer cordon, which is mainly going to be local and state law enforcement that are kind of holding down that outer perimeter. And that's important for what we're talking about here.
So let me go back to I'm going to call them the shooters or the snipers on the day of, because we're obviously seeing a lot of video and they're doing a lot of analysis of their actions on that day. They wouldn't necessarily be part of that pre-team on site, or they would. You said sometimes you can show up a few hours before, maybe a day before. There's no way for us to know exactly when those guys were aware of it, but generally speaking, could you show up 6 hours before, 7 hours before, and be given your assignment at that point?
100%. Yeah, it's unlikely that those guys were a part of any initial site survey. They could have been, right? But more likely than not, they show up a day prior or day of, hey, here's your sectors of fire. Here's what, the planners initially identified, right? So they're probably not in the detailed, planning process too much. The main thing here is that former presidents are not given the full package like a sitting president would get, right? The sitting president's going to get the full counter assault team. He's going to get a full counter sniper package, right? It sounds like out there at former President Trump's rally, he only had 2 counter sniper teams, 2 teams of probably 2 or 3 guys, right? So we see, from the video, right, that, these guys had a view of where the shooter was. Well, that's not the only place they're scanning, right? They have to do 360, right? They have to be looking in every direction.
That's a good point.
And that's 2 teams of probably 2 to 3 guys. Now, there are other eyes and ears out there, right? You have other, the counter assault team members out there, local and state law enforcement, but it's a lot of area to cover for pretty small teams.
And not to make this political, because that's not the point of the conversation, but it's also been noted that Trump's team requested on several occasions additional security support, simply because he's a little different than most he's a little different than most presidents or candidates. He's rerunning for president. He's obviously a populist candidate, and those requests were denied. Well, and that is part of the narrative here. I mean, that is part of the narrative. It's been confirmed he asked for that help.
I understand, but it's been disputed whether or not it was given to him or not. But no,
I don't think it has been disputed.
I think it has 100%.
FBI said that they didn't receive any requests for additional support. So they're going to go back and, of course, say that they didn't receive anything. So it's in dispute whether there's actual, additional security
was made or. But I did hear what I heard, and obviously this story is very fluid and the details are changing all the time. But I heard that there were 4 teams, 2 were Secret Service and 2 were local.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that's, I would assume, pretty common, right? Because some of those local folks can be very well trained, right?
Yeah, the state and local, or the local and state agencies are going to have their SWAT teams, and their SWAT teams are going to have snipers, and so they're not going to be as well trained or experienced as the federal folks, the Secret Service guys, but they could be, right? They could have military backgrounds, and they could be very good at what they do. But you're really going to be relying on those counter sniper teams from the Secret Service to protect the former president, because it's what they do day in, day out, right? Some of those, law enforcement, police snipers, they may do, more offensive operations, hostage rescue type stuff. And maybe they're not as well trained in counter sniper operations.
And they certainly haven't worked together as a team for very long, if ever.
Yeah,
right?
That's my biggest, issue here is communication. Right. So being able to communicate between teams, between state and local and federal law enforcement, that's the number one issue of why this happened here is poor communication.
That was also one of the major learning points from 9/11. the intelligence communities involved were not properly sharing information with each other, which contributed to the attack.
That's 100% right.
And so I've heard some people refer to the day before Trump's assassination attempt as September 10th, right? And then we have September 11th. Obviously different scale, but you would think that, I mean, I'm a layperson for the most part, right? My military service had nothing to do with this, nothing to do with security. But it's just so hard for me to believe, and I know we'll talk about this, that a 20-year-old untrained kid, literally living with his mother and father, could get on the roof of a building within 160 meters of former President Trump with a direct line of sight. There's a lot of people in this country that make that shot without much problem. I would say everybody in our office makes that shot with the exception of Sean Flood without much problem.
Well, I think that's right. And I mean, you're saying what everybody's saying, 2 or 3 days after. And I think that gets us to maybe the next big topic is the perimeter. And I think that's the thing, at least from what I'm seeing, the reporting, it's the thing that's most puzzling for everybody to understand is the perimeter. But I think what I'd like to hear you talk about is what's a normal perimeter when you're protecting somebody? And maybe that's a foolish question and will expose my ignorance when it comes to military operations. But what, when you think of distances in the position that you've been in the past, what's close? What's far? I mean, is it hard for you to imagine something being that close?
Yes. So I'll talk about it from the position of the counter sniper, right? Because a lot of the blame is being, put on their shoulders, and it's not entirely their fault. Mostly not their fault, actually. So if I am in that position of one of those counter snipers, I'm going to be thinking like a sniper, right? I'm going to be thinking like a professional. Where would someone be if they were trying to get a clean hit on the former president? Probably somewhere in between 400 to 700 meters using a 308 or 338, right, to engage him from that distance, right? Not going to be using a 223 because what does that mean? You got to get closer for a 223, right? A 223, is equivalent to a 5.56. It's an AR, right? And typically you're going to, be 500 meters or closer with an AR, right? A kid like this is not going to be able to engage a target accurately beyond 300 meters, right? So I'm going to be looking for, now I'm looking everywhere in my sector of fire, right? But I'm really going to be concerned with 400 to 700 meters. I'm going to be looking, in windows, cars, people, right? Where could they fire from, concealed positions in the woods, right? So that's really where I'm going to be scanning. And I think, and this is speculation, that there was some overconfidence there that, well, this building 150 meters away, it has to be secure, right? It's way inside this, this bubble. And it actually turns out that the security cordon didn't extend out to those buildings, which I think is an issue. And I think it comes down to, again, limited resources, right? You don't have the full package. You don't have as many resources to secure as many areas. Now, I think that building was initially cleared by the Secret Service and by local and state law enforcement, and then it was just scanned after that.
Yeah, but it
right?
certainly wasn't secure at the time.
It wasn't secure at the time because he went up there and jumped on the building, right? Yeah. But initially, they probably do a sweep through the building, and then they continue to scan that building and all the others, right? But I think that if you look at the way that the Secret Service sniper reacted, he had to adjust his rifle because this was actually so close, right? That he was looking out further to, potential targets out there. And then, oh my gosh, they're actually, this kid is actually only 150 meters out. Now, another thing is that what we see in the media and we see the video, right, of, oh, well, how did they not see him? He's right there. They're right there. If the picture is going to come out, right? But it's already circulating online. The picture from the counter sniper's position, and it's not as clear as you would think. So as you're looking from the counter sniper's position, it's actually you're looking like through some telephone poles, through some trees, over at the building.
He's in an angle,
and he's
down,
on the the back side of the building, so he's kind of below defilade, right? So I mean, you're looking at maybe 5 to 7 inches of exposure for probably a 5 to 10 second period, right? And you're scanning this entire area, right? Yeah. And that one little spot pops up right there. So once you see the picture of what they, from their perspective, it's actually not as easy of a shot. Now, they did it and they shot him in the head and it was a great shot, but it was very, very difficult to see him from their position.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear you say that. And again, there's a million reports out there. We don't know which ones are accurate, but I heard one today that was, they were looking past. They were looking further out for a threat. And then when that threat arose, he had to readjust. But you actually see him in the video kind of grab his whole, I don't know, a rig, whatever you call it, kind of grabs the whole thing and then sets it back down, and I think then shoots. It's amazing to me that he could be that accurate and hit what you're talking about in that short of amount of time. But it looks like he made an adjustment at the very least.
Yeah, and so when you're looking at an optic like he has on that rifle, and when I saw that picture, I immediately knew it was Secret Service just because of the kit that he's wearing, the plate carriers and the gear, but mainly his weapon that he's using, right? It's a .338 Lapua. It's got a really beautiful optic on it. It's got an IR laser on it. So when you look at that sort of equipment, that screams federal all day. That sort of money, right? And so, but you look on that optic probably has, a 10 power out to maybe like a 40 power magnification, right? So we don't know what magnification he was at when he was scanning. He could be at 25 power. So when you move to go scan over to hit somebody at 150 meters, I mean, you're basically looking at, their eyeball at that point.
I was
right?
going to ask you how much you see when you look through that scope.
So,
like, what is the magnification and how clear is it?
Yeah, if he's up to 40 power or something like that, you're going to be looking at someone's eyeball. And that's not really ideal if you're engaging a 150-meter target. You want to back that magnification out. Now, I don't know what magnification he was on when he was scanning, right? But I think it's very difficult. You talked about the video, maybe him firing. I don't see him fire initially, early on, the counter sniper, right? I see them react to gunfire and kind of get their head down, which is a human reaction, right? And then I think he gets his weapon adjusted and then he fires, and I don't see him fire because the video ends at that point.
And are we even sure that was the team that took the guy out? I mean, we don't have
confirmation. We don't have confirmation. We know it was a Secret Service team that took him out. So it was likely those guys because they were right there and they had they were in the position to do so. I think that once they initially saw him firing, then they quickly engaged him.
Dan, how do you think they identified him? I was thinking about this. Would they have seen the blast from the rifle, the AR itself, to identify him, or is it just they're trained and a number of different factors help them locate this guy? Because he's wearing gray camo, is what I read, so he's kind of blending into the top of that building to some extent. And he is tucked down quite low because I looked at one photo. I mean, there's not a lot of him visible above the top of the building, if that makes sense. So how would they identify it? Would it have been the firing from the actual rifle itself, or would there have been other factors they looked at to find the guy?
It could be a number of things. It could be muzzle flashes that they see. It could be they see him with the naked eye. So you see when, the initial gunfire starts, the counter sniper that is nearest to us in the video, he removes his cheek from the cheek weld and is kind of gets his head down, and then you're kind of scanning with the naked eye at that point. And that's what you're doing. You're doing a combination of scanning with your optic and then with your naked eye as well, right? And your spotters are going to do the same thing. They probably have spotting scopes. They're scanning with the naked eye as well. So I think that he probably identifies with the naked eye, I see where he is, and then gets back, puts his cheek back on the cheek weld, reacquires his sight picture, and then goes ahead and engages him.
Now, are these guys trained? To? I mean, would it have been a headshot for sure? I mean, is that what they're trained to do?
Yeah, especially in that circumstance, you're engaging what you see, and the only thing they're probably going to see is his head exposed. So, I saw the pictures of the shooter that was dead. It's indicative of a head wound.
It is.
He's bleeding from the ear, and it supports that. Yeah, he was shot in the head. And when that's the only thing exposed, that's what they're going to go for. And they got him.
I mean, you say it was a tough shot, right? And I don't understand the mechanics of a lot of this, but you say it was a tough shot, and then I
don't want to say tough shot. I think it was tough to identify when you're scanning. The shot itself is fairly simple.
I see, because it's 160 meters.
Yeah, and you got a 338. I mean, it's an easy shot, but it's difficult for them to initially identify him because of how small his signature was at that point. And
to put that in perspective, if you've spent any time on a range, right, even your basic Army range on qualification day, and you're talking about 160 meters to 200 meters, and I remember getting a line of sight, on even those those props that pop up on the range, right? The targets on the range that pop up and you got to shoot them. The profile is not that big, even directly in front of you. So these guys probably would not have, they would have had a hard time finding him, I imagine, at least for some period of time.
Well, yeah, I mean, to answer your initial question, Matt, to give this perspective, every single soldier in the United States Army is trained to qualify out to 300 meters with a basic M4 with iron sights.
We've all done it.
Right.
We've all done it with iron
So
sights.
that would be twice the distance.
Twice the distance. Now, the Marines qualify with an M16A4 with iron sights out to 500 meters, right? Now, that doesn't mean the soldiers and Marines hit every 300-meter target or hit every 500-meter target. You can qualify without hitting those longer distance targets, but you're trained to engage folks that far. Now, the typical U.S. Army or Marine Corps sniper engages targets out to 800 meters with a 7.62 millimeter rifle, which is a 308, right? Now, with that weapon, you can engage out over 1,000 meters, probably out to 1,200 meters, right? If you got, good conditions to fire out that far.
I couldn't even think about trying to make a shot at 1,200 meters. That is incredible to me.
Well, so then once you go up a caliber, you can go up to the M107. They have new variants now with the 50 caliber sniper rifle. You can shoot out to 1,600 meters and beyond, which is a mile. And folks have done that in combat with 338s, 308s. They've engaged targets out over a mile.
Let's finish up just a couple more questions on the perimeter. How shocked are you at how close this guy was able to get?
I mean, of course it's shocking, right? Because he bypassed, several security measures, right? They were in place. Local, state law enforcement, Secret Service, roaming patrols. And I think he just got very, very lucky that he got past everyone, was able to get onto the roof. And I think that, the law enforcement officer that went up there to confront him, once the crowd says, hey, there's somebody up there and they got a rifle, local law enforcement goes over there and climbs up the ladder to try and get to him, which forces the shooter to turn around, point his weapon at the law enforcement officer. The cop ducks.
Which is a natural reaction when somebody points a gun at you.
Totally, natural reaction, right? And then that forces the shooter to turn around and begin rapidly engaging the former president, right? Which probably was the reason that his shots were less than accurate.
Yeah.
Right? Now, one, was very, very close to getting him, but we have that law enforcement officer to thank that, he had to engage the former president more hastily than he probably wanted to.
That law enforcement officer, I was thinking about this on my way to the podcast studio today, likely, even without engaging the shooter, likely saves Trump's life, because that would have had to, we're talking about a 20-year-old kid with, as far as we know, no training. I mean, the reports I read said he tried out for his high school rifle team and was cut in a matter of days because he couldn't safely handle a rifle. That guy comes up the ladder. Whether the shooter points the weapon at him or turns towards him, that would have absolutely sped him up. And that may have saved former President Trump's life, because I was trying to explain this to my wife, who's never fired a weapon in her life. 160 meters is a basic shot that I took growing up as a hunter with my father. Yep. On deer. Basic shot.
I'm gonna fact check you, because I saw your wife take down some clay pigeons one time with a shotgun.
Yeah, she may have shot our
shotgun. She looked very at home.
She may have shot the shotgun a few times. But my point is like not a lot of experience, right? I mean, 160 meters is a simple shot.
Well, and I think the lesson to be taken away here is you need to be able to train. And, what we did in the infantry and special operations is be able to go up a ladder, come over a wall with one hand on the ladder, one hand on the wall, and you draw your secondary, which is your pistol, and you can have that in your right or left hand, whatever, is more dominant. And then you be able to engage a target as you're coming up over a wall or coming up a ladder onto a roof. You got to be able to do that. And that might have stopped this entire thing, as if he's able to simultaneously engage. Look, you can armchair quarterback it all day. Lessons learned. There's going to be a lot of lessons learned here from this.
I know you want to get into the comms issue, and I want to talk about that too, but why don't we have a local law enforcement person up on the roof of those buildings? There weren't that many from what I saw. I saw the map that's been circulated, and it looked like there might be a dozen of those kind of outbuildings, pole barns, storage facilities, whatever they are. It's hard to tell. But, why not put a law enforcement officer, doesn't necessarily, I would assume, need to be Secret Service, but a local law enforcement person up on the top on those roofs, or even one positioned at each corner of the building to stop somebody from scaling up there. Why do you think that wasn't done?
Yeah, so I think that you could have had a law enforcement officer up there, or, better yet, you could have one drone operator.
So how about a drone?
One drone operator just scanning the area. They'll be able to easily identify, hey, units 1, 2, and 3, we have a, shooter on top of this building right here. President is off the stage at that moment, right? And that's the issue I have with the comms is that, when I was in the military, and I know that, a lot of, federal law enforcement, and special operations units, they do it the same way, is that I have 2 radios on me. I have one radio that is a, kind of for everybody on the net, right? Higher command down to, your squad leaders are going to be on that radio, right? Everybody hears big picture, right? My other radio is just my internal comms with, my team, right? Me as a PL would be with my platoon sergeant and squad leaders, right? And then this radio over here, that's with everybody. That's what should have happened here, is that everyone should have been on the same net, right? And I'm sure they were to some extent, but every single cop out there has got to be on the large net so that they could have said, hey, we have a threat on this rooftop. And then immediately President's detail gets him off the stage, right? It's
he would have never got a shot.
He would have never gotten shot because the shooter was up there on the roof. People were talking about it. Law enforcement was trying to get up there for probably 30 seconds to a minute,
they
maybe
said
even
longer
more.
than that. They said
maybe even more.
On the ground,
I'm just giving a modest estimate, right? 30 seconds to a minute. That is more than enough time to call it in, to get the president off the stage, so that we don't have the situation we did.
What's surprising to me also, and I've heard a couple commentators on CNN and Fox and stuff talk about this, and this is something I noticed when I was watching the footage immediately after all this happened. And it does, it caused me some concern, and maybe I'm just wrong about this, Dan. And look, Secret Service guys, they're people too, right? Highly trained. But even after the shots were fired, when you see President Trump being taken to the SUV, at least one of those agents, and I think I saw 2, were having a difficult time even unholstering their weapon.
Oh, it was reholstering their weapon. Yeah,
reholstering the weapon.
Reholstering weapon.
They looked like they did not, to me, when I think of Secret Service, I'm not you. I don't have your background and experience. These guys, to me, are supposed to be some of the best out there, period. And I'm not by any measure disparaging them whatsoever. They are brave, highly trained Americans, and we thank them for what they did for former President Trump. But when you look at that clip, you don't walk away from watching those clips with a lot of confidence that former President Trump was well protected.
Well, I think that it's easy to look at the one person, who she's operating off of adrenaline, and she doesn't reholster her weapon. When it doesn't matter if you're a basic rifleman or you're a SEAL Team 6 operator. You generally look down at your holster to reholster it, right? To see where
Jocko would not look down, Dan.
Everybody looks down.
Jocko would not have looked down, dude. Come on now.
Well, the best shooters I know, everybody looks down at their holster when they put it in there, right? To make sure that it's properly seated. And she wasn't doing that. I think she's scanning the crowd and going to put the weapon in. So, it's easy for us to jump on her and be like, oh my God, she can't even reholster her weapon. I think your adrenaline's going. You just had an attack on the president, shots fired. I think generally the response of that immediate detail was pretty amazing.
Yes, the immediate detail was
and she was a part of that immediate
she
detail.
was. She's right there the whole time.
And so they jump on them, and I think that they have a very tough and thankless job, and so they're all willing to put their lives on the line for the president, regardless of who it is. And so I think they're pretty amazing.
And they did that day. They didn't know didn't know the shooter was down.
I will say this
until after they're already up there protecting him.
With a caveat, though, I think that they were on stage way too long. Right, shots fired. You don't know the extent of the threat. Right, there could be multiple shooters. Right now, I think that they hear it's on the radio. Shooter down, shooter down.
They hear it pretty quick. And Trump, we don't know what Trump was. We don't know what Donald Trump was telling them either.
Well, no, we hear it. So he's saying,
not all of it.
Let me get my shoes back on. Hold on. He's wanting to raise his fist.
Before he gets up, when they're kind of on top of him, we don't hear what he's saying, because you watch the clip and you see the guys like move, and they're not moving. And I just assume, maybe I'm wrong, I assume that's because something's going on with Donald Trump.
Doesn't matter. You get off the X. If your principal is attacked, you get off the X as quickly as possible. I don't give a shit what Donald Trump is saying. get him out of there now, right?
Interesting.
Don't care about his shoes. Don't care if he wants to rally the crowd. Now, that was awesome. It was a very American moment for him to do that. That was impressive, regardless of how you feel about him. But they took way too long on the stage.
I think there's been some criticism about that, obviously. But let me ask you two more questions, Dan, just to get back to the threat itself. And these might border on the hypothetical, but is there any problem identifying? And I realize he was hard to see, but let's assume that they could visually see him through their scope. Is there any problem with identifying him in the sense that he's not supposed to be there? So those snipers, when they look down, let's assume they saw him before the shots broke. They know immediately he doesn't belong there by the way he looks, and they can make that out on the scope and everything. There's no issue with identification, right?
Sure. I mean, when you're scanning crowds, buildings, cars, I mean, you're going to be looking for suspicious individuals, right?
So they know he's not supposed to be there. He's not part of a team.
Well, if he's on a roof,
like
sure, you're not supposed to have anybody on a roof.
Yep.
But you may identify him on the ground. I don't like the way this person looks. I don't like their body language. They're trained to read folks.
And then does he have the green light? Let's say they saw that guy up there with the rifle. Does he have the green light?
We have wide discretion.
Doesn't have to ask anybody. Doesn't have to.
I don't know if he actually has to call it in, but you have wide discretion. If you see somebody with a rifle, you don't have to ask. You can shoot. Right now, he may have called it in, right, to request permission to engage because he looked, sketchy, and maybe he didn't see a rifle at that point, right? But you have wide discretion as a counter sniper to go ahead and engage.
I just don't even understand, from my perspective, how does the guy even get on the building with all, I mean, I guess you already answered it. There had to have been a lot of luck involved. I mean, this is, again, an untrained 20-year-old kid that finds himself in a laying prone position with a firearm 160 meters away from former President Donald Trump. And what you see in those collective videos, law enforcement's everywhere.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
Well, that's the most difficult thing about being a counter sniper, right? Is when you are a sniper, you are on the offensive, right? When you're a counter sniper, you're on the defensive, and it's vigilance, right? You have to be vigilant every single time, day in, day out. That's all those guys do is Secret Service counter snipers, they protect the president, former president, whoever they're protecting. They have to be so vigilant every single time. You only have to have one idiot 20-year-old get it right once.
Yeah.
Right? So they have to be vigilant every single day, day in, day out, where they don't see anything, right? And there could be some complacency there. They have to get it right every time. That kid only has to get it right once.
That's right. And he's willing to put his life on the line to try to do harm like that.
Well, yeah, that's, when you get up on a building like that is exposed, right? And you're going to fire on the former president, you know that you have no avenue of escape. That's why snipers don't choose rooftops, water towers, anything like that, because what's your egress?
Yeah.
Right? How are you going to get out of there alive?
Yeah.
Right? So it was clearly a suicide mission, and he probably knew that he was going to die.
What happens? We're going to wrap this up here in a few minutes, but what happens after? I think I've got really two questions about kind of the aftermath of an issue like this for, again, not necessarily the Secret Service, but somebody who's trained and their responsibility is as a sniper. What goes on after this? There's obviously a debrief. There's what went right, what went wrong, I would assume. And the other question I think is related to that, which is how often do things go wrong? Like in all the missions that you did, was it this went right 90% of the time, 99% of the time, 100% of the time, and once in a while you'd have an issue? Or was it really like, no, there could have been problems on a lot of these things, and we learned and we moved forward? And
so I guarded Saddam Hussein for 12 months. It wasn't every day because they would only bring him in for a hearing maybe twice a month. So I was, maybe 30 or 40 times I'm out there watching him. Out of all those times, one time it went wrong. And basically we're about 20 minutes out from the Blackhawks coming in with Saddam.
Now you're not going to give anything. We can talk about this, right?
Yeah, and that's fine. And so basically we had a water tower off to our right, and this water tower could see down into the helipad, right? Could see the helipad perfectly. So we're about 20 minutes out, maybe 15, and it's me and my spotter up there. We go into this, it's one of Saddam's wives. It's a palace that he built for her, and it was bombed out. So the place is kind of a mess. And so we would park down below. We would leave our plate carriers actually in there because we had to scale several walls to get up onto the roof. So basically I would be carrying an M4, a drag bag with an M24, and then I'd be carrying an assault pack as well. And so what we would do is I'd go up there, we'd get to the final level, I'd put all my gear down, I would run, get a foot up on the wall, jump to get my hands up on top of the wall, and then pull myself up. Then once I was up there, my shooter would then hand me my equipment. I'd put it up there. He'd hand me his equipment. I'd put it up there, and then he would run and scale the wall as well. So then we'd get up there and get into position, and then we would start scanning our sectors of fire. Well, as we're looking that day in particular, there's some individuals, some males that begin climbing this water tower. And now, we're probably 15 minutes out. So our blood starts, going, and I call in, I say, hey, Hatchet Mike, long range 6, we have, several, males moving up to the top of this water tower. They have some sort of equipment with them, request QRF to come out and deal with them immediately. Right? Nothing. Radio silence. Called in 3, 4, 5 more times. Radio silence. Nobody's picking up on the talk. So I tell my shooter,
and the clock's ticking.
Clock's ticking. I tell my shooter, I say, hey, range them. You take the 3 on the right. I'll take the 2 on the left. Get ready. We're going to do this. If it's 5 minutes or less, we're going to go ahead and take them out, because basically we see them getting up there on the water tower and they're laying stuff out. They have equipment. We're trying to identify what this equipment, it looks like some sort of maybe recoilless rifle or something.
Yeah.
And so I'm calling, and now we're down to about 5 minutes and nobody's picking up. And we got them ranged. We're literally ready to pull the trigger. And finally, they come back on. They say, "Hey, we hear you. QRF's en route." QRF comes up there, gets on the megaphone. Get off the effing building, or get off the water tower. Get these guys down. Turns out they were welders, right? And we almost smoked these dudes.
Dude, thank God.
Oh my God.
It's very difficult when you get in these shoot, don't shoot situations, right? And so, that counter sniper is probably thinking about, this is probably just some dumbass kid climbing up on the building. I have to be careful about who I take out here, right? But
that was once out of, you say, maybe 40 times. Yeah. That was the only time. So it's really a low percentage of
very low
problems
percentage
that come up.
Last assassination attempt we had was 1981 on President Reagan. So you got to think about, the counter snipers go out there day in, day out for decades, and they never see an attempt, right? So that's why that vigilance comes in.
I thought about Ronald Reagan during this weekend, in particular when I first heard about the shooting within minutes of hearing about it, because from my recollection, Ronald Reagan did not know he was shot until they were back in the limousine. And it was only when somebody does a full body scan of Reagan that they reach under his underarm, they pull out their hand and it's covered in blood. Reagan didn't even know he was shot.
Yeah, it's pure adrenaline.
Yeah, and I was very much hoping that the reports on Trump were not premature, because I was thinking about that myself. Geez, I hope the guy's not shot and doesn't know about it. That's scary, but that's what happened to Reagan. And of course, I read a book on the Reagan assassination. Folks don't recognize how close Ronald Reagan was to dying. Yeah. He was very, very close.
It may even have been later than the limo, I think, before they realized that it was very, you're right. There was a lot of time had passed before they realized he had actually been shot.
That's right. Yeah. And he, that was major surgery that Reagan went through. But Dan, I do have a question for you. Secret Service folks, are those typically prior military folks? I mean, what are they typical law enforcement? Is it kind of like some of our elite forces in the military, where they come from a number of different places and they kind of take the best? Who comprises these people generally?
Yeah, all walks of life. All walks of life. So, much like the FBI, to be a special agent or to get onto the FBI's hostage rescue team, you don't have to be prior military, right? You can go do your time as an FBI agent and then go to selection and try out. The Secret Service has the same thing. You go try out for the counter assault team or counter snipers. You don't necessarily have to have a military background. Now, it obviously helps, right? And I think most of those folks do. Probably over 80% of them are former military or former law enforcement, right? Some, Secret Service recruits from local and state law enforcement as well. So they usually have tactical backgrounds, and they go in to those units already having a little bit of experience, but it's not mandatory.
One more question for you. The shooter, they've identified or they've collected what they were referring to IEDs and bomb making materials, both in the car and the home. And this is I'm asking you to speculate here with your expertise and your background. What are some reasons that somebody would be building an IED for an event, assuming he's building it to hurt President Trump? What could have been his motivation there for building IEDs? Is it possible he was thinking about...
It's a complex attack. So it's when we talk about a complex attack, that is both small arms fire, IEDs, rocket attacks, right? So in this context, it would be, he opens up on the president, engages the president, and then detonates, most likely a command detonation of an IED in his vehicle, which then turns it into a vehicle-borne IED, right? A VBID. So that's entirely possible, right? That he wanted some complex attack so that, when folks went up there to search his car, it detonated, right? EOD professionals did a great job going out there and rendering it safe.
And I mean, you never know, too. Those guys in Boston, they had all kinds of explosives. And when they had that all-out firefight at the end, that allowed one of those guys to get away. And he ended up, in the boat. But they had all kinds of pipe bombs and things that they were throwing. So maybe he thought he might have a chance to get back.
I'm
to
sure
his
he had
car
options.
And,
he had
who
options.
knows what he was thinking, but
well, they said. I mean, his contemporaries said he was a smart guy. He was a bright guy. He had gotten some awards for math and science. But at a very human level, this is just very sad. I mean, the idea that this person became so troubled and so delusional, and we've seen it with other, right? Our typical attempts on public figures, whether it be John Lennon, whether it be William McKinley back in the day, James Garfield back in the day, which those are historical accounts I'm very familiar with. It's always a little sad when you find out who these people are behind the scenes, because they're oftentimes tortured souls. That's not to excuse anything he did. He's a murderer. And had he lived, he should have been prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And he didn't live because justice prevailed and he was taken down before it could hurt anybody else. But it doesn't change the fact that that's obviously a tortured soul.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that I saw reports that, he was bullied and he was, socially isolated. So it'll be interesting. My initial thought on this is, he's probably a mentally unhealthy individual, much like a lot of the mass shooters, right? And obviously politically motivated to target Trump. But, we'll see. We'll see what the investigation reveals.
Yeah.
It's early in the investigation, but they don't know much yet. I mean, I use the word delusional, and that's an assumption because there's no record right now to suggest that he had mental health problems. I mean, we can certainly assume it, but there's no evidence of that at this point in time. But clearly a tortured soul.
Yeah. All right, 2 more questions for you, Dan. One, what do you think those snipers were thinking when the shots broke? Is it just automatic? Is it automatic you rely on your training? Is it, oh, shit, here we go? I mean, what's that thought?
They're operating off of pure instinct at that point,
yeah.
right? That they've trained for this moment, all their career, and now they just got shot at. You see them duck their heads, and then they engage. But I encourage everyone to go look at the picture from the counter sniper's position. It's not as easy as it looks when we're looking at the footage. Looking at the stage, we see where the counter snipers are, we see where the shooter is, and you're like, oh my God, that's just an easy, pluck them off. It's a lot more complex from their vantage point. So I think they're operating off of pure instinct, and I think that they're taking a lot of the blame right now. It is their job to engage him and eliminate him before he gets any of those shots off, but it's not entirely their fault. They got a very difficult job.
Once the shots broke is incredible marksmanship and bravery. All right, we're not going to talk politics, but I do want you guys on record. What do you think happens from here on out? Are we looking at a Trump-Biden election in November? Who is Trump's running mate and who wins? And we're not going to talk about why. We're just going to give our predictions.
Yeah, so, when I sent out the initial picture to, a couple group text where Trump has got his fist raised and the American flag is up behind him, I said the election's over, right? It's over. He's got it. As long as he can maintain this momentum that he has right now. The election's a long way out, but he is in a very strong position. He's already leading in a lot of the early polls. And I think that, Biden's performance was lackluster, to say the least, at both the debate and the press conference and everything. I think a lot of people are worried about his capacity, right? And so I think that Trump is in the lead right now. I think if the election was today, Trump wins. But I think a lot of it does depend on, who Trump picks as his VP. There's a couple leading folks. I'm not really impressed by any of the folks that he wants to put up as VP. Vance from, Ohio, he's a really young guy. He's only just, was elected in 2023.
Yeah.
Ben Carson and some other folks. Tom Cotton. I think that, personally, I think that he could have picked some more impressive people.
Your prediction on record is Trump wins in November.
If the election was tomorrow,
all right,
I think it's going to be close.
I'm not going to answer the question as quickly as you want me to because I want to
because you want to talk about a bunch of politics.
I want to say a few things. So first and foremost, everybody knows that I'm a man of prayer. I'm a man of faith. And one thing that I would say is that if there was any encouraging light that came from what happened over the weekend, it was that it was the first time in a very, very long time that I had watched major news networks and people were referring to prayer. People were referring to God. They were referring to the grace of God. I think there should be a lot more of that in our politics. I think there should be a lot more of that in our nation. I think this nation is deficient of prayer. And I think we're a nation founded on Judeo-Christian values, and that's inherent in who we are as people. So I don't care what you believe, but I felt very, I don't know, I guess spiritually lifted up to hear so many people refer to God. The second thing I'll say about the election, there's a long way to go. And I've never been a big President Trump fan. I've always kind of leaned right in my life. There's a long way to go. And here's what I'll say about President Trump. What he did, from my perspective, was awfully heroic. I think it proved to a lot of people he's just not a talking point. When you look in that man's eyes with blood on his face, that's a man who believes in what he's doing. But there's been very few political candidates in our history that are populist to the extent that Donald Trump is populist. Very few people that can generate this kind of following. Teddy Roosevelt did it. Barack Obama did it, right? Very few. And Donald Trump is capable of generating incredible positive feedback from his followers and from the people on the right. He's also just as capable, more so than any of those other political candidates that I've listed, to absolutely fall off a cliff and blow this opportunity that he has to bring our country together, because this country is in great need of healing. And I really, really pray that Donald Trump and Joe Biden take an opportunity, and we've seen some of this already, to heal this country, because it's as divisive as it's ever been. And this is a wonderful opportunity. And if Trump is the man that he thinks he is, a man of destiny, which is what Donald Trump would refer to himself as, he's got an opportunity at the convention in a few days to really make a difference, I think, in this nation. You guys can laugh at me all you want.
That may be the longest prediction that didn't actually predict in the history of prediction.
Well, the good thing
uniting
is
the country.
Podcast.
I understand that, but what's your prediction? And don't punt on it. You got to get. Who do you think wins in November?
I think Donald Trump is going to win, but I do not think. I think the Republicans are making a very big mistake if they think it's a foregone conclusion. 4 months in the political life is a very long time.
Who do you think he picks as his running mate?
I'd like to see. So I actually saw Rubio as a potential. I read about him this morning that he's now on the short list. I don't know who he's going to pick. I don't have any idea. I like to see him pick Ben Carson. I think Ben Carson's a man of integrity.
I don't even think he's in the running. I think Trump wins in November. I think he surprises everybody and picks Nikki Haley at the convention. And that's my prediction.
I hope that doesn't happen.
So, great episode today. Dan, thank you so much. I will thank you for your service, and you too, Robert. There will be so much Monday morning quarterbacking on this issue. It'll control the news cycles for weeks and months. But
everyone's
the reality
sharing their
is,
thoughts. Everyone's sharing their piece based on their experience.
That's right. I mean, the reality is there were some real brave folks who stepped up on that day, and unfortunately, some Americans were. One gentleman was killed and others were injured. So we'll keep them in our prayers. We thank all of our listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Military Justice Today podcast. Stay safe, and we'll see you later.
Thanks for listening to the Military Justice Today podcast with your hosts, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams. This show was made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. For more information or to listen to more episodes, visit militaryjusticetoday.com.